Hey everybody, it's time for the August Money Minute Roundup. 5 articles from this month. Interesting articles, starting out with one from Visual Capitalist about retirement savings and reaching the quote unquote magic number. This is a survey done by Empower asking people how much do they think they need in order to retire successfully. And the answer is definitely varied based on where people live and their age. But the magic number for people who live on the West Coast is 1.2 million. The smallest number was for those who live in the Midwest, 860,000. That makes sense. Higher cost of living in the West and the Northeast especially, so the numbers that people cited as far as what they would need in order to retire on varied, but it averaged out to about $1.1 million. So across the board, Americans feel that they need to have about $1 million, maybe slightly more, in order to retire successfully. The problem being, from the respondents to the survey, the average expected amount that people will have is only about $250,000. So there's a huge gap between what people think they will need for retirement and what they actually expect to have. And this is for a variety of reasons. A lot of times people tend to underestimate the power of their own compound interest over time, and people also tend to overestimate their actual financial need in retirement. But still, that is a very large gap, and it is concerning to say the least. A really big thing that's highlighted in the survey responses is the role of retirement plans in retirement savings. And so for a long time, we had a pension system in America that has really been all but replaced by a 401k or similar type of retirement plan system, where it is a voluntary contribution on the part of the employee and then very often a matching contribution on the part of the employer. What's happened in the last 10 years or so has been that the way that 401k plans are being offered has really changed. And that is some small psychological tricks, but making 401k participation default and asking employees to opt out. So if you go to employees and say, hey, we've got a retirement plan, do you want in? Let us know and we'll get you signed up. Some people will, some people won't. But if you say, hey, we've got a retirement plan, we're signing you up for it, there's a 5% match, we're gonna start you out at 5%. If you don't wanna do it, let us know. Otherwise, that's what we're gonna put you at. Much, much higher participation. And it ends up being a much stronger, better outcome for those involved. And so what's happening is, for a lot of people, they're being automatically enrolled in their 401ks, and not just that, they're being entered into an automatic escalation of their contributions over time. So in other words, the company will start you out at 3%, and then what they'll do is they'll bump up your contribution each year until you get to 7% or whatever number they decide on. And when you do it that way, not only do a lot more people participate in the program, but a lot more people will little by little increase their contributions, which makes it easier for them as well, because typically what's also happening year after year is they're getting at least a cost of living raise. So they're not even feeling the effects. They're not even seeing a dip in their paycheck each week. And so it's leading to better outcomes. And you're starting to see a lot more people participating in 401ks. Nearly half of millennials, Gen X, and boomers participate in a retirement savings plan. Only 30% of Gen Z, but that's mainly because Gen Z is still in the early entering the workforce years, and I believe that will catch up over time. So concerning on one hand, but also promising as far as the most helpful and powerful avenue to retirement savings is definitely through your workplace retirement plan, and more people are starting to utilize that and utilize it to a higher degree. Second article is from a guy named Rick Forster. And the title of the article is "Freedom is not the highest form of wealth." And I've heard people say this in one way or another, that what's more valuable than money is freedom. And I certainly understand the sentiment of that statement, that money in and of itself is not real wealth. Real wealth is in something more intangible, something that's not as easily quantifiable. But is freedom the best measure of wealth? Well, for me, I'm definitely biased towards freedom. That's a big reason why I wanted to start my own business. It is part of my financial why statement. I love freedom. I love flexibility. I love having control over my own schedule. But I have to agree with Rick and the argument that he lays out in this essay, that freedom is not the highest form of wealth. And he's speaking from personal experience as somebody who has done very well financially and who has attained freedom. There is still more. And really the point he makes in the article, and I hope you'll check it out, is that really the highest form of wealth, in his opinion, is meaning, or I guess you could insert the word purpose. And it's very thought provoking, and maybe you will end up agreeing with him, maybe not. But certainly, I think meaning and purpose are a higher form of wealth than freedom, because even if you have a lot of money and you can do whatever you want, that doesn't guarantee happiness or fulfillment or peace in life. There are certainly many people who have attained great success financially and can do whatever they want now and have freedom, and they are still miserable and they still feel a void in their own life. But there's also many people who don't have a lot of money, and I would say maybe don't even have a ton of freedom, but they have meaning and purpose, and they lead much more fulfilling lives. Whether that's being a soldier and feeling that meaning and purpose of protecting others and serving, whether that's a doctor or a nurse and your meaning and purpose is helping others and saving lives, or a teacher and inspiring others. And so if you live a life that is rich and full of purpose, I think that ultimately, as far as human experience goes, is a lot more wealthy than money, and yes, even freedom. So I hope you'll check out the whole article. Very, very well put, and I think he makes a lot of great points about what we miss when it comes to the pursuit of freedom, and also a lot of movements like the FIRE movement and some things that have become very popular as of late. People chasing freedom, thinking that it's going to be the ultimate form of wealth, and then arriving there and figuring out that it's actually not. Next article, this comes from my backyard, just a little bit of Florida experience here. So every year in Florida, they do this python challenge. Pythons have gotten into the Everglades, and they're a massively problematic invasive species. I think it goes back to people actually having pythons as pets and then releasing them, but they have wreaked havoc on the Everglades. A lot of other species have really, really dwindled because pythons thrive in that environment, and a lot of birds and mammals, we've seen their numbers go way, way down. So Florida hosts this python challenge every year where they have encourage people to go out, catch as many pythons as you can. There's prize money. They caught almost 300 pythons in the space of about 10 days, which is crazy. The longest one was 15 feet. And the winner of the $10,000 challenge, she caught 60 pythons. So if you love snakes, I think this would be a cool article. If you hate snakes, this sounds like an absolute nightmare, trudging through the Everglades swamps, trying to find pythons. But good for them, because the Everglades is an amazing ecosystem, and we want all different types of animals to thrive. And that's a very Florida article, probably the most Florida article I've read this month. Moving on, next article is Donald Trump signs an executive order to allow private equity and real estate investments inside 401ks. So typically, most 401ks right now, you have a menu of funds that you can invest in. They're almost always in two different types of investments: stocks or bonds. So you have growth investments, stocks, you have more conservative investments, bonds, and that's typically what you have available to you to invest in inside of your 401k. This new executive order would open up some other types of investments, private companies, private equity being one of them. So a private equity just means companies that are not listed on a stock exchange. They're not publicly traded. There's many companies in America that you can own stock in, but they're not publicly traded. You can't find them on the New York Stock Exchange. Similarly, real estate, lots of different funds, lots of different ways to invest in a larger group that owns many, many different properties, and invest in real estate in that way. Is this a good thing? Well, certainly the idea of opening up more investment options sounds good, but in practice, I'm not really convinced that this will serve people well. Private equity, private companies are notoriously more difficult because, first of all, usually, historically, regular average investors haven't been able to invest in private equity because the minimum investment amounts are very high. Also, private companies, the pricing is very tricky. So getting real-time, accurate pricing, if your company's on the New York Stock Exchange like Apple, well, the pricing is built in because you have so many people trading it. You know exactly what the price is at any given second. But if it's not listed, pricing it can be a little bit tricky. Also, the liquidity of it. Buying and selling gets a lot more tricky. If you want to sell Apple shares, you can do that in seconds because there's plenty of people who want to buy Apple shares. There's constant trading back and forth. Private equity, not so much. And also the costs involved. Those that run funds to provide private equity there's a lot more involved in that process. Therefore, the fee structure ends up being a lot higher. And so when you combine all of those things and get it to the end user of somebody in a 401k, will what they're getting in the form of a private equity fund actually be better than what was already available to them through publicly owned companies? I'm not so sure. Similarly, the same types of challenges with real estate. There is a chance that this will be reviewed and ultimately not go through, but it'll be an interesting change. The final thing to note on this too, though, is even 401k providers themselves, because of the added liability, may not even touch it anyway. They might not even want to provide extra funds for private equity and for real estate. Basically, my point is this: for those who your typical 401k participant, stocks and bonds are doing just fine. It's not a broken system. There's not really a need to fix it per se. And so I wouldn't feel like this is going to be a silver bullet that magically transforms people's 401k savings. But it is interesting, and I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on it. And then lastly is an article from Newsweek about Gen Z's financial reality. There is an app called Step that is designed specifically for Gen Z. And through the financial app, they're able to gather some data related to Gen Z's financial habits and spending. The big headline is that nearly half of Gen Z, they're running out of money each month. So they're not getting ahead. They're actually falling behind. There was a separate study that found that Gen Z had the highest level of personal debt, almost $100,000. So there's a lot of things, unfortunately, for Gen Z that are coalescing at the same moment that are working against them financially. But also let's keep in mind that every young generation, when you start out in your 20s and 30s, most people aren't just killing it financially. There's always a learning curve, and there's always certain obstacles that you're overcoming. But I think there's some unique things that Gen Z is facing right now. One of them being the rising student debt costs. We've come to this moment, this crisis moment, I think, in our country where people are really starting to evaluate, is a college degree even worth it when you consider the massive amounts of debt and the number of people that have gotten out of college and aren't able to find a job in their related field. So I think there's a renewed interest in trades and in people going straight into the workforce right after high school. Depending on what you're wanting to go into and what you're wanting to study, that may or may not be a good thing. But then also you have some other things that are compounding against Gen Z. Housing prices have just been astronomical recently. And so even for millennials, even for Gen X, people are still struggling to find housing that's affordable. And so Gen Z especially. Also their early career, and the economy has changed. The gig economy is really on the rise. A lot of Gen Z workers work for, do Uber or do DoorDash or these types of jobs, which are great on one hand because they provide a lot of flexibility and opportunity, but they're challenging on the other hand because they don't have consistent hours or consistent pay, and they don't have benefits like healthcare and like retirement. And these are really important for building lasting financial stability. And so I'm optimistic in the long term that Gen Z will eventually get to a stronger place. We saw a very similar thing happen with millennials. I think about 15 years ago, people were bemoaning how millennials are going to be the most lost generation financially. But then on top of all that, I would say the last thing that's working against Gen Z is that there's a consumer-driven culture that they're constantly consuming through social media. So the buy now, pay later, being able to buy things that you constantly see advertisements on TikTok, on Instagram, on sites that Gen Z tends to be the ones that are most frequently used. And so you have this pull, this desire to want to have everything now, all the things that you see other people having, when you're just not in a position to be able to afford those things. And so all of those are working against each other. But also, on the flip side, Gen Z has the most education, the most resources on their side more than ever. So for those that really want to make healthy financial decisions, that want to pay off debt, that want to start saving for retirement, that want to organize their cash flow, all of those things are there. So as long as the desire is there, there's great apps, there's great books, podcasts. So we have so much at our fingertips now that'll help us, empower us to make those good decisions. But at the same time, we do have a lot of things in this moment that are working against that financial stability. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Well, that's the wrap up for this week. As always, if you want to see the Money Minute email that we send out each month, just shoot me an email, info@nateskelly.com, and I can get you added to that list. Thanks as always for watching, for listening. I'll be back here with a couple new interview podcasts, and then we'll also be finishing our series on working with Nate Skelly and understanding the process of how we help clients here at Financial Pathway. Thanks as always for listening, for watching. I'll see you on